Hi, Cutman here. I'm sitting in front of the project for another medium featuring epic game music. Last week, James posted his music video for the song. I just posted up a visual video on Game Chops, and I thought it would be a cool opportunity to show you a little bit what's going on in this project and some of the things that I did to make these guitars sound so awesome and the whole track just sounds so full. So we're just going to go from the top to the bottom. We'll check out every track. If you're not a producer, you're in a production, you'll still have the opportunity to hear each piece of this song, which can be really cool. And if you're into music production, I'll be showing off some of the plugins that I use to give the things their sound. Of course, the whole track sounds like this. Probably put my headphones on, that'll help. Before I get into it, I just want to note I do have some mastering effects turned on for the purpose of this video. They are not the same mastering effects that I used in the finished track. It was too CPU so CPU intensive, I can't even say it. Let's start with the bass track, which was a synthesized bass based off of a bass line that Epic Game Music performed. So here it is. It's got this like squeaky quality to it. And so the first thing I did is I added R bass, which sort of beefs up the bottom part. It takes the information and sort of adds these lower harmonics, which can make it feel a little bit fuller. You take it off, you hear we lose a little bit of the bottom end. That's going to be more noticeable if you have a subwoofer or you're listening in headphones. Next up, what I did was I added FabFilter Saturn, a multi-band distortion plugin, and that let me grid it up and also add even more to the harmonics, make the sound sort of fuller and just more. It made it more. Then I'm running it through a guitar plugin called the Maserati GTI. This is the best way I could describe this plugin. It's by Waves, and they make a ton of cool stuff. And this plugin, what it really does is sort of shapes the sound. And I love using these with sounds that have the right like tonal quality, but don't sound as full or as sort of nice all around. So I threw the GTI on, messed with these settings, really kind of slamming it and compressing it, and I think that's giving this thickness. Then I'm using another harmonic plugin called Max Bass to take out the original foundation of the bass, the super low frequencies that were in there, and replace them with just perfect, even, computer-generated frequencies down there. So you can see my original bass line, all these very low frequencies, and just get out of there. Just give me those core, those feelable frequencies, which are mostly in the range of 60 to 125 hertz. This is a pretty aggressive chain, so pretty intense one to start. Next up, it looks like I have a stereo imager that isn't doing anything. I guess it was mostly to make sure that the bass is mono, and it is. And then lastly, I have my EQ. I'm taking a big dip out around 660 hertz, and that's to make room for the lead guitar, because with all the processing I'm doing, this area actually got quite a little bit overblown, as you can hear if I turn it up. And that wasn't really the sound I was looking for this, so I left it down here. And then, of course, at the very end, I have a very aggressive chain of compressors that are handling the side chain for when the kick drum comes in, and that just keeping the whole mix cleaner. Now the last element of the bass is this MIDI track underneath it that I did not name. It's called Serum, and I'm using the synth Serum to add this grit on top of the bass line. And it's a very simple synth. There's a little bit of modulation, but the idea here is just to add a little bit more on the top end, kind of the area that we're taking out, this 600 hertz, but add it with like this pure, modern, very clean synth. It sounds a little gritty, but like the way it produces sound is very clean. So together we get this. That's the bass sound that we hear in the song. So it's two layers here, that big meaty bass that's heavily processed, and then this layer to sort of give it sort of this crunchy top end that you might hear from a distorted bass guitar, but rather than distorting the bass guitar ourselves too much, I'm using a synth to create that, which just allowed me to get a little bit cleaner. So that's the bass. What's up? Let's take a look at the guitars, because that's Epic Game Music. He's a guitar player. He's a great guitar player, and working with his stems were just freaking awesome. So this whole track he sent me, I think it was 2 guitar stems, the bass, and maybe that was it. Gosh, he didn't send me a whole lot, and then I blew it out. So let's first check out the lead guitar, the melody track, and I'll show you a little bit about how I processed it. that's everything. Let's just solo the lead guitar. All right, so this chain is not nearly aggressive as the bass, but there is some important stuff going on. This is the isotope ozone imager, and what this allows us to do is set the stereo space for a sound. And what I've done is I've taken the low and the low mids and brought them in closer to the center. It was very, very wide when it was recorded. As you can hear now, especially if you have headphones, very, very wide sounding. It sounds like it's way out here. I brought it in because typically in pop music and stuff, the leads are made to be center. And since the melody, this electric guitar is the part of the song that is really carrying the melody and it's the lead, so to speak, it's leading the other parts, I brought it into the center. I didn't completely make it mono, which would have sounded like this, because I felt like it kind of dragged some of the life out of it when it's totally mono. But by bringing it in the lower sections and leaving it really stereo up top, it kind of keeps this stereo wideness feeling, but it focuses the lead towards just the middle, which I think sounds really good. I burped there, excuse me, but that's the thing. So after doing the stereo treatment, I brought in another Maserati GTI, the same plugin that I used on the bass. With this one, I'm going to bring this down so I can talk a little bit. I'm not running it nearly as hard as I was running on the bass line, but I'm processing it with the same plugin, and I found that when I use the same plugin, the same kind of processing on multiple instruments of the same song, it creates this kind of sense of cohesion that can be really nice. Next up, I have just a little bit more compression. I didn't feel like the GTI was compressing it quite the way I wanted to, but I have this compressor, is the FabFilter Pro C2, and I'm just compressing this high mid area. Well, actually, it looks like this is just the regular mid range. And that's because I felt like at certain points the guitar got a little bit too high, a little bit too kind of piercing in the middle of the frequency. So this allows me to just sort of squish it down. It's not a multi-band, there's only one band, but it's not touching the bottom of the guitar, just this one area that felt like there was an issue. Then I have my sidechain compressor compressing to the snare drum, not the kick drum, just to sort of make the mix a little bit cleaner, and then finally my EQ at the very end where I'm boosting the top where the guitar just simply didn't have anything, and I'm bringing just a little bit out of this area that you can see is pretty toasty. This little 2 to 5K region, pretty toasty. Now the cool thing about the way that I've processed the melody is that I processed it in mind with how I want the harmony guitar track to sound, which is right here. This is the opposite of what I was going for with the lead. This is very, very wide. There is an auto pan on it, which is moving it back and forth. And if you see, I'll click on the rate. Oh, come on, show us, Ableton. The auto pan actually changes throughout the whole song. So the rate at which this harmony track moves from left to right speaker is changing throughout the whole track. And I felt like this is like a real key to make sort of a, repetitive. I don't know another way to say it. But this is not a huge arrangement. There are no big drops or anything like this. This is a pretty straightforward cover of the Undertale song. And this type of production tricks, this automating the auto pan and changing the way a signal is processed, allows us to hear the same part multiple times without getting sick of it. Because when we hear it in this chorus, it's different than when we heard it in the first chorus. And even though all the notes are the same, the way the track is moving, the way it's processed is different. Of course, I'm also processing this with a Maserati GTI, same plugin I used on the bass and the lead guitar. And then at the very end, I have just a little bit of EQ. Notice that I'm not pushing the high end up so much on the harmony track because that high end I really wanted to come through on the melody. And on the harmony, which I gave it a little bit of brightness, but not too much because the melody was really taking care of it. Now, for a cool thing, I have what I'm calling a melody plus 12 track, which is the melody track, but it is pitched up an entire octave. And it sounds like this. It's kind of weird. It's got a lot of texture. There's also an auto pan on this. Again, Maserati GTI and EQ on everything. But I really like this because it only happens a couple times in the song, as you can see. It happens for about 8 seconds at a minute in, and then it happens for the last 30 seconds of the song. And what I feel like it really adds this dimension to the lead. This kind of panning sparkliness, and I really, really like that quality. And it's done by simply transposing the guitar part up an octave, see? So that's what it sounds like normally. I push it up 12 semitones, and I'm processing it with what Ableton calls its beats mode, which is giving us that rhythm, which I think is really cool. The rhythm guitars. This was an issue. As you can see, the rhythm guitars actually only come in at the very end of the song, and that's because I struggle with them a lot. Mostly because they were already so compressed with the way that they were processed, or maybe the way they were played. I'm not a total guitar expert, so I'm not exactly sure what caused this, but they were super thick sounding, and I just couldn't get them to cooperate. But then in the final chorus, I found through multiple attempts to get these guys under control that I was able to do it. And the way I was able to do it was by creating 2 separate rhythm tracks, panning one left and one right to make it wide, and then also processing them just a little bit, of course, with kind of aggressive EQ, and then yet again, a Maserati GTI from Waves. And I believe both of these have the same chain on them, so let's hear it. Oh, we're hearing the reverb coming through, and that is a routing situation that Ableton has. Let me see if I can turn that off. So here it is. It's very reverby, it's very distant, and that is intentional. I have both of the rhythm tracks running into a group, and the group is being compressed in the lows and in the mids, where things get kind of out of hand. Then I have another very aggressive EQ, and it was only with these huge cuts and really aggressive shaping that I was able to get these tracks to cooperate with the rest of the mix. But now that they're all processed, we can hear it. It's in the reverbs and stuff back on. And you can hear everything sitting really nicely, but until I really got in there, shaved a ton of frequency off, and then grouped everything and shaved even more off did I get everything to cooperate. Here's what it finally sounds like. The rhythm guitars are you almost can't hear them. They're like a texture in the background rather than a forefront, big gritty thing. And I like that. I originally thought that the rhythm guitars were going to play a much bigger part in this track, but because they were so thick, and probably because I just compressed the hell out of everything else, they just would not cooperate. So I finally got them to work here in this last section, and I think it really adds a nice quality to the final chorus of the song. Chorus, I mean, there's no words, but yeah, I think it really worked out. Do you guys want to look at the snare? Is that boring or cool? Let's listen to it. Honestly, I think the most boring thing is watching a producer work on drums, but I get a lot of questions about it, so I'll point out a little bit. The snare is a nice sample from some sample pack, who knows what. Oh, it's from Contact. It's the Stadium snare. I'm running it through yet another Waves plugin called JJP Jack Joseph Plug? The JJP drums, and listen to it without this plugin. It's just like, it's all right. It's all right, whatever. This plugin is another, like many Waves plugins, is designed to really shape the sound, and I just think it makes it punchy. It gets it out of the way really quick. We got this nice like attack, and it's gone, rather than this one, which is just, to me, feels a little like kind of in your face. This one is like, it feels more appropriate for the rhythm and the tempo of the song, and then of course EQ cutting off the low end after the snare, because we just need that hit. We don't need anything else. And the snare is layered. There's another layer down here. That is the unprocessed trap snare. Oh my gosh, there's no EQ on it. I'm so embarrassed. And then afterwards, there's a third layer, which also has no processing. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I shipped this. I mean, it sounded good, so that's probably why I didn't do anything to it. It's not always necessary to process every single track, but I usually like to throw an EQ on everything even if I'm not using it, but I was hitting serious CPU spikes with this project, so I had to call it at a certain point. Now you can hear the whole snares. Here we go, together. And there's two different ones. So there's the one where all 3 stacks hit, and one where all 2 stacks, where just 2 of them hit. And I think they sound really good all together. The layers really add a lot. You can hear, again, without the layers, it's much more dialed back, but with these 2 trap samples, you really get that punch through, which I really like. It's aggressive, but it's not like, it doesn't stay. They're very quick and short, and that's what I like. Now moving on, we have our kick drum, which also has some layers. And oh my gosh, the kick. And then we got a layer, this little thump. Now what I'm doing actually here, oh my God, did I really do in phase on this thing? It doesn't look like I did actually do this. In phase allows you to very quickly, to the hundredths of a millisecond, adjust the timing of a track to make it gel better with other tracks. I gotta make my own video if we want to talk about phase stuff, because it's super boring. You can see I have a little bit of EQ and shaping on one of my kicks, and then the other one is just straight out of the box. Oh no, it looks actually that we have a huge boost at 60 hertz, which is like the boom, the thump frequency. 60 hertz is the rate that power runs at in the United States. It's 50 hertz in some other parts of the world, but I find when you have, if you have sound at 60 hertz, a thump or a boom or something you want to come through a subwoofer, having it at 60 hertz sounds really great. And I don't know about other countries that use 50 hertz power, maybe 50 hertz sounds really great. Who knows? But together the kicks sound like this. Ooh. And there's quite a bit of reverb on these kicks too. We'll visit the reverb at the end of this video, and we're getting there. We're getting there. We're more than halfway through the track now. But the reverb, I think, is really important. I usually don't put a lot of reverb on my kick drums, but for this track, I really wanted that kind of big stadium epic feeling to it. I mean, it's epic game music, might as well, right? And the reverb really played a big key in that. Let's move on. The hi-hats, you can see how insane I got with my patterns. I redid these hi-hats so many times. I have 4 different hi-hat samples. There's a lot of reverb on them, but no real EQ or processing. Wow, no EQ. I am ashamed of myself. There should be EQs on everything. I usually put EQs on everything. I guess it's because I was building this project on my laptop for the most part, and I don't know if you can see in the upper right. My CPU is just going wild just making this video, so yeah, and I remember that I actually could not export this project on my laptop when it was all done because of all the plugins, and I'll visit the mastering section too. There's some ride cymbals, they're normal. Nothing much to see here. My crash cymbals also, I've been using this sample a lot. I discovered it when I was making Mitomo grooves, and I just love it. It's called the Smalls Crash. I just think it's delightful. It almost always sounds good. I have some sound effects. Which are fun, and then of course another sort of effecty kind of sound, again with just a little bit of EQ rolling off the bottom end. And look, and we're at the bottom of this thing. What is this? What's this over here? This is something for the intro. Yes, that's the whole track. That's the whole like first 2 or 4 measures of the track, recorded by itself with no drums, then reversed, compressed, and limited to make the intro of the song, which sounds like this. So there's the track here. Let's take a little quick look at the way I'm doing reverbs. Reverb has been a big mystery to me for many, many years. I'm finally felt like in the past couple years I've really started to understand what reverb is good for and how to really deal with it. I put my reverb on send tracks, which are here at the bottom. And that means that I can send multiple tracks to one reverb unit. And the benefit of doing it this way is you're using a lot less processing. And 2, by sending multiple things to the same reverb, you're effectively creating a more realistic environment because all of your instruments would be in one room for a live performance. The reverb unit acts as that one room. So I'm using my favorite reverb right now, Waves H Reverb. It's super cool. There's a tremendous amount of options. But the trick that I'm using to really make it sound good is I have EQs set up before and after it. Before the reverb, I'm rolling off the low end and the high. And then after the reverb, I roll off the low end again just to make sure it's really clean. Now I'm going to show you, I'll solo this reverb, and this one is just for the guitars, what it sounds like with and without this first reverb. All right, we mean this first EQ, so let's take a listen. So that sounds pretty good. I like it. It's a nice, solid reverb. If I turn off this top, though, listen what happens. We have more cymbals that I'm mixing a little bit of the cymbals into here, but they're really coming through now. And we have a kind of this like this hotness, this kind of spikiness on the top end that I like in the guitars, but the reverb, I don't want any of that in there. So by rolling off the top before we even get to the reverb unit, we can really kind of shape what the reverb's gonna sound like. And by EQing first, the reverb has to do less work, and we as the producer have a little bit more control over what the reverb's getting. Now I'm also using an ambience for like a whole room. Here it is. The big part of this ambience reverb is getting that snare to have that presence. Again, I have an EQ going in before the reverb. This little dip right here is made specifically to dial back the impact of the snare. I wanted the boom, but not the going through the reverb. And again, rolling off the top. If I take this top off, all of a sudden we have this lots of this high-end stuff that I don't want in the reverb. It's also super important to roll off the low end before we go into the reverb, because I don't know if you can even hear this. I can barely hear it. But by having this low frequency go into the reverb, it's gonna make a less clean reverb signal. And even if we EQ it after, like I am, having this signal going into the reverb at all can kind of muddy things up. Holder's hitting me up on Skype right now. I gotta get back to him. We're almost done, buddy. We're almost done. So we looked at the reverbs. Now we got the delay, which is really this. I'm a Waves. I am such a fan of the Waves plugins. I'm not the biggest fan of their DRM, but I am a big fan of their plugins, and I guess they gotta have that really intense security where you can't run your plugins on two computers, even if they're right next to each other, because their plugins are great. So we have this delay right here. This is the H delay. It's like kind of analog style, and the big thing is this is what the cymbals run through, and it gives every cymbal hint this kind of like delay. I mean, obviously it's delayed, but it gives this nice sort of atmosphere to it. And it really helps out with the crashes. It really makes a cymbal crash like linger and stretch out and become a big atmospheric element, which is what I really like my cymbals to be. Like, listen to that. So cool. And lastly, I have a distortion unit, similar to what you would have on a guitar. It's a FabFilter Saturn, and this is a multi-band distortion, which means I can pick the lows, the mids, the high mids, and the highs, how much distortion to apply to each band. Let me turn this up. There isn't a lot of it. But it adds this, by distorting all these things, basically the whole track, or the tracks that I've picked. By distorting them, I can kind of fill out gaps that would exist in the frequency. Say our mid-range isn't totally full because there's no vocal or something like that. Or maybe our lead guitars have a little bit more high mids than they do mids, and we're having a little gap in our frequency. Using distortion is a really easy way to sort of smooth out those gaps and make the track sound fuller and more full. Great one, Cutman. Another thing I'm doing, which is unusual for me, but it seemed to really work in this track, is I'm throwing a reverb on after the distortion. I can turn it off. And now the distortion, you can hear, it's just a little bit more like kind of ouchy times. Put the reverb on. And the reverb is pulling it back, and because this is Waves H reverb and there's so many controls, I'm doing a little dip in the mid-range lows and highs to sort of even out. And the very last track you hear is a key track, which controls some of the sidechain compression that's going on elsewhere in the track that I don't want to show you in this video because it's just too much to handle. But there's some really technical stuff going on under the hood. Lastly, everybody asks me about mastering all the time. I've mastered hundreds of tracks, a huge bulk of the CHIPTUNE's Win stuff, a huge bulk of the Game Chop stuff, all of my own material, a bunch of tracks for my friends and fam out on the internet. And so take this as my first reel showing y'all how I master a track. This is how I mastered this track. I had to pull a couple plugins off because of CPU, but I'll go over it really quick. Let me play the song, and I will touch on every of the mastering effects plugins just so you can see the order that they're in and what they're all doing. And I'm not saying this is the way you should master all your tracks, by the way. This is just the way I mastered this track. And yeah, I hope you like it. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I'm going to do this last part. Video will be done. Thank you for watching. I'm signing off before I'm even done. Well, mastering is kind of like the sign off. All right, so let's hit this. Whole track, please. I gotta bring the volume down so I can think my way through this. So the very first thing that's going on the master chain is this SSL compressor. This is a bus compressor. It's based off the old SSL boards back in the 90s. This was called the Hitmaker. These days, this plugin is not as useful for EDM and big super loud material as it has been, but I like it particularly in tracks that have really big kick and snare drums because it makes the whole track kind of like gel together. If you're familiar with a plugin called the Glue, this SSL compressor was what the Glue is based on. So it's the very first thing that happens, and it helps sort of just bring in my drums and sort of glue everything together. Next up, I have another compressor, this one with the Hard Rock Punch Glue preset. This is FabFilter Pro C2, and this is not crushing it. This is just, again, bringing in the drums a little bit because I deliberately mix my kick and snare really loud to be compressed and mastering and sort of glue it all together. So this is, again, a little bit more of what the SSL comp is doing, bringing the whole track together, bringing down the drums just a little bit for the sake of the whole track sort of gelling. Next up, I have the FabFilter Pro MB Multiband. This is the plugin that's doing a lot of the work to get the spectrum sounding so nice. Bringing in the sub bass, which we can see here is much higher than everything else. Tempering the low mids and the high mids, and also sort of easing out the high end. This plugin is great, by the way. Again, now next, another FabFilter Pro MB. This one only doing 3 bands, a big sweeping low band to keep stuff that actually seems to be completely turned off. Actually, this compressor is only compressing the mid-range. This is kind of interesting. I did not remember doing this, but I know why I did it. The mid-range with the lead and harmony and melody guitar was just a little overblown. So I'm using this multiband to just focus in on one band and even it out. So again, the first four plugins on my master have all been compression. Is that the way you should always do it? I'm gonna say no. But is it the way that made this track sound real nice? Yes, it is. Next, I have a new plugin I've been playing with. It's the Ozone Dynamic EQ. Similar to compression, similar to a multiband compressor, the Dynamic EQ looks at the sound that's coming in and adjusts EQ accordingly. This isn't compressing, all right? This isn't squishing the signal. This is simply boosting it or cutting it down in a fixed amount. You can see I pull my threshold down. You get a little bit more there, I pull it up, get a little bit less. This is, again, tempering the mid-range where we had all those guitars because I have a love-hate relationship with electric guitar. I love to hate it. It seems to always want to be the boss of the song no matter what the song is. This is how I'm kind of dealing with it. I'm also bringing up the bass a little bit. Or actually, no, it looks like I'm bringing the bass down just a little bit and bringing the high end up just a little bit with this dynamic EQ. Where the hell were we? Next, I have an exciter I had to turn off to make this video because it was too much CPU. Harmonic exciter, again, can kind of fill out a frequency spectrum, look at the data that's there, and create more harmonics based on what's there. Now we're getting up to the master EQ. This is a very delicate, very small adjustments, as you can see. I'm only going up 0.75 dB, down 0.5 dB, not even going up 1 decibel. I've got a tiny boost around 60 hertz. I've got a tiny boost around 700 hertz where the low mids were just a little less than I thought they would be. This could be because I overly EQ'd some of the other signal. It could be because I took out the rhythm guitars for most of the track, or it could be a result of simply just the way the track is built. I was able to correct it with a little boost. You see this little M here. I took yet again a little bit of frequency out of the middle of the mid-range, which is mostly the lead guitar, the stuff that's right in the middle, not out here. And that's again to sort of temper the guitars and make sure it's not like lasering your eardrum with loudness. And then the thing I've been doing a lot recently, which is giving a little bit of boost at like 20K, all the way high up, because it just sounds pretty. It just sounds nice to give a little bit of boost. Not every track needs it, but some of them do. See, even this that's a huge boost right there I just did, and it still sounded pleasant. And that's why I love the FabFilter Pro Q2, is because it sounds good, man. Not all EQs are created equal. I'm using the natural phase mode on this EQ. So if you have FabFilter Pro Q2, the natural phase mode sounds better. It introduces the tiniest bit of latency. I don't ever notice it, but it's definitely the choice for reverb for mastering, and I like to put it on natural phase on any track. Lastly, I have my master limiter. This is actually the plugin I set first when I'm working on a master. I use this limiter to set the overall volume of the track, and I go and I add compression, and I usually keep the limiter up, referencing it every time I add a new plugin or make another adjustment. I revisit the limiter to make sure it's not, you know, not doing anything like this, or completely annihilating the track like this. This is the Waves L316 Master Limiter. It is, how many? 16 bands? Is that right? 2 4s. I count 6 here, but I don't know. There's 6 different bands we can control. And each of them have 2 different abilities. The ability to boost the gain, it'll be really noticeable here. There's that ouchie guitar part that I spent so long getting out of here. So one, I can boost the volume of each band, and the other, I can boost the priority. The higher the priority, the less it gets limited. This is super critical in EDM because when your low end gets limited or compressed, the bass stuff, all the bass takes up just this tiny amount of frequency in the overall audio file. So when you're compressing your bass, it can get distorted and gross really fast. This plugin allows me to say, hey, don't touch this bass, it's really important. You can touch the mid-range more than the bass, but also that's important too. And these high mids, just go ahead, get them, send them to hell, that's what we need. And then I can also bring it down a little bit and sort of cut out some of the little low end, some of the little poopies below the range of human hearing that may still exist in the audio file, but we don't want to hear on a track. And then one plugin that's at the very, very end of this, which cannot be turned on, but I can show it to you, is the Isotope Ozone 7 Maximizer. This little guy has a very nice dither, which prepares the final audio file. And I find just has a bunch of like really modern features like true peak limiting, stereo unlink, transient emphasis, all these nice abilities, auto blanking. It has all these features that just make a better quality audio file. So even though I'm using the L316 to do the bulk of the mastering limiting, I'm using Ozone after it to prep that final audio file, give the tiniest little bit more squeeze on the track, and then use its really nice dithering, use its really nice inner sample peak detection, and all this stuff. As you notice, I am not using dithering on the L316 because that's happening on Ozone afterwards. Thank you so much for watching. This became an incredibly technical video, my goodness. If you made it to this point in the video, leave me a comment and say, Cutman, I made it to the end, because I wouldn't have. Maybe I would have, I don't know. I try to be entertaining. I try to make this stuff accessible, but gosh, guys, it's like hard to make the really technical mixing and mastering stuff fun. I suppose it is more fun than this, though. I'll give you that. My name is Cutman. Thanks so much for watching. I will put some cards up there where you can check out the song. And be sure to check out my music channel, Game Chops. If you came from Game Chops, let me know in a comment because I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. And let me know what you think in the comments. I said it a million bajillion times, but I mean it. I read all the comments on this channel, I do. And thank you. Thank you so much. This has been DJ Cutman and Epic Game Music, another medium, a remix from Undertale.